Kia ora and welcome to the second session of our short course looking at assessment capability. The follow-up activity to session 1 asked you to find clarity around your beliefs and approach to being assessment capable and effective assessment for learning. The purpose of this video is to help you to consider some effective pedagogies that may need to be included in your beliefs on assessment capability, how you're being culturally safe when undertaking assessment, and the methods you have in place or need to have in place so that your approach is being executed school-wide and done proficiently by all. In the first video, we looked at the relationships first position on assessment for learning, based on the research of Te Kotahitanga. This position emphasises the importance of empowering Māori students to be self-determining and evaluators of their own learning. Accordingly, when identifying pedagogies to support effective assessment for learning, we need to look at pedagogies that facilitate students being active participants in their learning and evaluators of their learning. Research shows us that for students to become assessment capable, they need to understand what success looks like, what criteria define success, and how to compare and evaluate their own work against such criteria. Consider in your schools, what practices are there in place to enable students to be able to answer those questions? How involved are the students in co-constructing what quality work looks like? What pedagogies are in place to help students evaluate their work against success criteria? And do your beliefs around assessment capability actually include students? To do this successfully, there are a couple of factors that need to be in place. Firstly, clarity in learning is critical. Hattie emphasises that teachers need to be very clear about what they want their students to learn and be able to answer the following questions. What is it we want our learners to know and be able to do as a result of these lessons? How will they demonstrate that they have acquired the essential knowledge and skills? And what specific things are we putting in place to intervene and enrich the learning of our students? If the teacher is not clear on this, then they are not able to accurately and effectively assess the learning of the students or the impact of their teaching. Secondly, this information needs to be explicitly shared with the students so the students can be active participants in their learning. It is not as simple as putting a learning intention on the whiteboard for students to copy down into their books. Students need to really understand what the learning requires of them and what success in learning looks like. This requires highly interactive discursive teaching strategies involving conversation, debate, drawing on other people's perspective and understanding, and giving students the opportunity to ask questions. Models and exemplars need to be provided to support students to deconstruct the task and co-construct success criteria. If students have been involved in the creation of success criteria, they are more likely to take more ownership of their learning, be self-evaluative as they are working, and question the assessed work as it evolves. Another key factor to support students to become assessment capable is effective feedback and feed-forward to guide students in their next learning steps. Feedback is also an essential element of assessment capability for teachers, as it helps teachers assess and modify their teaching in response to students' needs. To begin to provide meaningful, constructive, actionable feedback, the learners must be able to answer these 3 questions. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? Hattie and Timperley consider feedback to be one of the most effective and powerful influences on learning and achievement, yet it is so varied in its implementation and effectiveness. There are several characteristics to consider when determining the effectiveness of your feedback. Feedback needs to be clear, purposeful, and meaningful. It needs to be compatible with students' prior knowledge and provide logical connections for the students. It must be linked to what is being learned, the learning intentions, and the success criteria of the learning. It should occur as the students are doing the learning and provide information on how and why the student has or has not met the criteria. It also needs to provide strategies to help the student to improve. Feedback conversations are the most effective when initiated by the learner. Teacher and student should make the decision together about the level of support which is needed. Not enough, and the student is still in the dark and doesn't know how to improve. Too much detailed feedback, and the student doesn't have to try. When the teacher has these learning conversations with the student, they are able to assess if the learning has been made clear, what the learner knows how to do, and where they can go next. Think about in your schools. What feedback and feed-forward you have given and observed. How effective was it in guiding the students? How well does it meet the characteristics covered above? And how active are the students in the feedback conversations? Understanding and supporting students' ways of making sense of their learning is fundamental to being culturally responsive and ensuring your students remain culturally safe when being assessed. Teachers need to ensure that their classrooms are places where their students' language, culture, and knowledge are a key guide to classroom interactions. Students need to feel that they can be themselves in their classrooms and bring who they are to the learning interactions in complete safety, knowing that their knowledge is accepted and legitimate. Research has found that many schools believe that only following tikanga or customs or displaying cultural iconography is sufficient for being culturally responsive and engaging Māori students. However, for effective teaching and learning to occur, and to effectively assess students to understand their full potential, teachers need to use pedagogical approaches where they can understand how a student's culture influences their sense-making process. When assessing students, teachers need to use assessment approaches that allow their students to determine how they're making sense of their learning, and not making them follow the teacher's way of doing it. During the assessment process, teachers need to be aware that they're working with culturally located learners and allow learners to bring their own cultural experiences to the learning interaction. They need to use pedagogical approaches that investigate and inquire into what the learners already know, utilize their prior learning, see students as being full of knowledge and skills, and seeing their students' language, culture, and heritage as assets and not hindrances to learning. Where there is a cultural mismatch between the teacher and the child, it is the teachers that need to make the adjustment. This requires a pedagogy of power sharing with the student, so that the student is an active participant in curriculum decision-making and the direction that learning will take. It is also imperative that when assessing their students, teachers do not think of their learners in deficit. If you see students as having deficiencies rather than potentialities, you will not be able to support their learning effectively or help them to achieve their potential. If your explanations for Māori or Pasifika students' lack of achievement are essentially blaming some deficiency of the student or their families, then the relationships and interactions you develop with these students will always be negative. Agentic thinking by teachers is required and means that they see themselves as being able to solve problems that come their way. They have access to skills and knowledge that can help all of their students, and that all of their students can achieve no matter what. Take some time to consider, what support are your teachers getting to develop their formative assessment strategies to be culturally responsive? Do your current assessment practices prioritise a certain way of doing things or a certain set of knowledge? Or are they adaptable to be open to different perspectives and different ways of making sense of the learning? The last thing we will cover is some questions for you to evaluate the methods you have in place or need to have in place so that your approach and beliefs around assessment capability are being executed school-wide and done proficiently by all. Do we currently promote the practice of setting learning goals across all classes? Are we all using a commonly understood progression or rubric to set these goals? What routines are there for your students to talk about their evidence, how they're progressing with their learning goals, and setting their next learning steps? What institutions are expected to allow peers, adults, and learners to have formative assessment conversations around goals and progress? What evidence do you have of the impact of these practices on students' learning? And what evidence do you have that these practices are consistently applied across your school?